Joe Biden and his office of the president-elect just offered members of the American left their opportunity to decry what, during Trump's era, they said they opposed: the dictatorial presidency. What a great moment for them to stand up against a coming deluge of rights-attacking, constitution-breaking executive orders. I wonder if they'll rise to the occasion.
Execute Order 66.
Welcome to the circus, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. And here's the information as reported by the Hill's Tal Axelrod. According to Tal, the Biden Super Friends team says that shortly after his coronation Wednesday, His Highness will issue a dozen super cool executive orders. Ron Klain, Biden's incoming White House chief of staff, wrote in a memo released Saturday that the orders will focus on the quartet of the COVID-19 crisis, the resulting economic crisis, the climate crisis, and a racial equity crisis, which comes as no surprise to those who recall that both Hillary Clinton and her former campaign manager and former Obama White House chief of staff and former Chicago mayor Rahm Emanuel advised other collectivist politicians.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Keen advice for megalomaniacs, especially when those crises can be manufactured by politicians and promoted by an accommodating and sycophantic pop media. Especially true when the vast majority of Americans seem blissfully unaware of the economic danger and anti-constitutional perversion represented by any president who claims he can do so much through executive order. And, of course, when those same Americans seem very unaware that D.C. itself, the entire government, is not supposed to touch such issues in any way whatsoever. There's nothing in the so-called rules of the U.S. Constitution allowing any branch of the U.S. government to do anything about a naturally occurring danger. Not a forest fire, not a flood, not a virus. If the fire or flood or virus is found to have been created by a foreign nation state, it's up to Congress to cite that foreign nation state and declare war. And only then could one possibly argue that the feds constitutionally could fight the fire or flood or fund a vaccine as a defense. And it should be stressed, such defense tactics would have to be stripped of pork bailouts and crazy bans on evictions and other nonsense the feds shower like acid rain on us through their deficit spending faux beneficence. And Biden's Siren song about the virus won't stop on Wednesday. Writes Axelrod, Biden will also issue a mask mandate on federal property and interstate travel and extend a pause on evictions and foreclosures. So much for that lack of any constitutional or moral power to tell landlords and renters how to handle their voluntary contracts. Biden seems quite ready to breach the bounds of the Constitution he will swear once more to protect and defend. With the same zeal he showed in his work shutting down an investigation of Burisma in Ukraine.
Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Joe appears quite desirous of making certain that American landowners will either be at risk of ceding their property to multinational banks or needing unconstitutional federal bailouts to prevent such foreclosures. He also appears eager to avoid the fact that just because things or people go over state borders, it doesn't mean the feds can control those things or people. As I've noted before, the claim of federal power in this instance is based on a misreading of the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, which, as James Madison said after taking notes at the Constitutional Convention, was written to allow for remedies of state versus state trade disputes, not to allow venal federal politicians to control interstate travel or trade. Madison likely would be shocked to see how this clause has been misread and misused since the days of the constitutionally dubious Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Likewise, Madison would have risen in furious opposition to the idea that the feds could fund an expensive, glad-handling, pork-barrel interstate highway system under the guise of national defense when the Constitution envisioned no standing army in the first place. All one need do is consider the absurdity of the fact that there's an interstate highway in Hawaii to realize how far off the rails the feds have gone in the last 200 plus years. But wait, there's plenty more, as Axelrod notes. Biden will follow up on Thursday with executive actions to, quote, move aggressively to change the course of the COVID-19 crisis and safely reopen schools and businesses, including by taking action to mitigate spread through expanding testing, protecting workers, and establishing clear public health standards. End quote. None of which is a constitutional purview of the feds or even envisioned by the Lockean theory of so-called justified government in the first place. According to the founder's vision, a polis or government is only justified if created to protect life, liberty, or property from encroachments by other people. It mostly stems from John Locke's 17th century Second Treatise of Government, and even this theory overlooks a great many moral arguments against the state itself. But at least on the traditional constitutional level, it's utterly obvious that the work of safely reopening schools, or of running schools at all, and of reopening businesses, does Biden's team mean businesses that have been forced closed by political diktats contrary to most of the Bill of Rights? Are those the businesses that they mean? And of course, the so-called action of taking action to mitigate spread through expanding testing, protecting workers, and establishing clear public health standards. Well, none of that has anything to do with the U.S. Constitution at all. Old Joe's push on all of these crises has very little to do with facts or the Constitution, and much, much more to do with expanding federal power and handing out cash. It's unlikely his orders will be opposed by many Democrats or rhinos in D.C., and very likely that his orders will be praised by the likes of talkers on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, and NBC. Old guard leftist newspapers like the Washington Post and New York Times likely will ritualistically chant about Biden using his executive power for good, never noting that, as J.R.R. Tolkien tried to warn people, the ring of power is unjust, immoral, and corrosive, regardless of who wears it. The original idea of executive orders was actually quite simple. Within the early executive branch, if a president needed to handle some small matter, such as moving an office inside a building, he could issue an executive order. But now there are so many federal statutes, so many federal programs, so many federal offices under executive control, the president's executive orders can touch on almost any minute facet of American life. Regardless of whether it's constitutional or even ethical to do so, he will think he can do so. Since Donald Trump got into office, so-called anti-authoritarians decried his use of executive orders, but not the concept of such executive omnipotence in the first place. Instead, they wore the cloak of anti-authoritarianism, when really they just wanted their brand of authoritarian in charge. It's something to remember as the worship of the new king begins in earnest. Hey, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope the next few days are good for you. And please stick with MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. Whatever happens on social media, you can always find the team there. Remember, if you want some great Media Research Center items, go to MRC-Store and look for us on Facebook, on Twitter. I'm on Gab at Guard Goldsmith. You can find us on Rumble, and Parler looks like might be coming back, so find MRC TV on Parler as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us during this crazy, crazy time. I'll see you in the comments section. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.